you know what codependency means? In this video, I'm going to explain what the term means and why I'm not actually a big fan of that term. My name is Dr. Felucia. I'm a licensed psychologist. And on my channel, I talk about not only spiritual abuse, but the dynamics of other types of abusive relationships or unhealthy, toxic relationships. And so I'm sure you've heard the term codependency before, and it probably means different things to different people. The way that it is most commonly described is a type of relationship where two people have an unhealthy dependence on one another. And there usually is one person who is enabling the other person's, I guess, destructive behavior, things like that. It's described in many different ways, actually, which is kind of part of the reason why I'm not a huge fan of the term. But in the realm of abusive relationships, you'll often find that if you have been a survivor of abuse, that you've been told, well, you're codependent. And I think that that term sometimes can come off as tone deaf, and it doesn't really take into account how that person ended up in that place. And so, something that I have learned over time, just in my professional journey, is that when I see a behavior that shows up, it usually shows up because it has served a purpose in the past. It serves some sort of like adaptive mechanism. And so, if you think about people who, and think about yourself, so we all have, traits or maybe behaviors that we are not big fans of, but at some point in time, they have served a purpose in our lives. Now, for those of you who are watching who have been survivors of abuse, whether regardless of the type of abuse that you've experienced, there are certain things that you have needed to do to survive. And so when you hear something like, oh, you're codependent, that can bring up a lot of shame for people. And they can, and a lot of people sometimes have asked me, well, what does that even mean? I know it's something bad, and I don't know what it means. And so instead of focusing on the meaning of it, because it's going to differ, think about a relationship dynamic that's unbalanced and where one person is um well, I wouldn't say unknowingly, maybe they know, maybe they don't, but they're enabling somebody else's behaviors that aren't healthy. And so why I don't like that term is when somebody has survived abuse, that codependency is something that has arisen out of need. And so I'd like for you to think about it, instead of codependency, think about it as trained dependency. When individuals have described the types of abusive situations that they've been in, whether it's emotional abuse or a psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, they have to they have to show up in the world and in the relationship in such a way to protect themselves. Right now, they don't have to do that all the time. As people move out of abuse and they move into recovery, they start finding different and new ways of interacting with the abusive person that they're in the process of leaving and other people. But while people are in the throes of that abuse, they're going to need to do what they can to survive. So I have another video on this about, I think it's called Why You Hold Out Hope That Your Abuser Will Change. And sometimes people look at it like, well, that's really stupid. Abusive people don't change. Why have that hope? In that video, I describe why people hold on to that hope and the purpose that it serves in surviving abuse. And so when you think about the abuse you've been through, think about what you needed to do to survive. Whether it was abuse from a parent, abuse from a partner or a friend or somebody, they likely had an advantage or maybe some sort of more power in that dynamic. And so when people are on the receiving end of the abuse, they are thinking of, what do I need to do to survive this situation? It might not be healthy, it might not be adaptive, but can I survive? And so Think about reframing that codependency as trained dependency. Codependency involves putting the needs of that other person above yours, sacrificing yourself in a way that's not healthy. But think about what happens when you're in an abusive dynamic. You have to be attuned to that other person's needs to protect yourself physically, protect yourself emotionally, protect yourself whichever way you need to protect yourself. And so what ends up happening over time is that as you are prioritizing the abuser's needs over your own, and you end up being I would say, like feeling like you are shrinking, that you're disappearing, that you're drowning. That happens over time as a protective mechanism. For people in the throes of abuse, it can be dangerous to assert yourself and to prioritize your own needs. And so I'm not going to go too much into this in this video, but I want you to start thinking about some of the terms you hear thrown around, especially if you have been a survivor of abuse, and think about the things that you have experienced that you are, maybe being called, okay, codependent, whatever, people pleasing, and reframe it in terms of a strategy that you needed to survive. When you think about it that way, then it becomes less shameful. You are not a codependent person, but rather you were trained to be dependent in order to survive that type of abuse. And so if you look at what you went through and those codependent behaviors as a survival mechanism, then you can unlearn those things, right? It's kind of like our bodies react a certain way when we are in physical danger. When we're not in physical danger, we sometimes react that way due to stress. But if we train ourselves to be aware of that, then we can unlearn those mechanisms. So the same thing as you are coming into recovery and out of those abusive situations, then you can retrain yourself, through therapy and through other means so that you are no longer in this mode of trained dependency. Okay, so instead of thinking codependent, oh, you're codependent. No, tell yourself, I was trained to be dependent as a survival mechanism, and I can unlearn those behaviors and do things that help me prioritize my own needs while also valuing and prioritizing the needs of other people. When we in codependent, so to speak, relationships, one person's needs are prioritized at the expense of someone else's. But in healthy, interdependent relationships, both people's needs can be prioritized. So I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about some other things. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments too, about maybe some labels that you've heard or you've even put on yourself or other people have put on you, but they were really survival mechanisms or things that you had to do to survive toxic, unhealthy, abusive relationships. And I'd like to hear from you in the comments about those. All right. So I hope that helps. And I, would love to hear from you in the comment section, about things that you feel like can help you through this process, help other people through this process. And I will see you in the next video. To book a free consultation, you can go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, and click on the orange button. If you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. Bye-bye.